Okay, hey everybody. I am going to talk today about the topic I'm going to go over a little bit today is antibiotics, and this is something that I think is vitally important for all of us to understand. It's something that people don't think about very often, and what we want to do is try to bring to top of mind consciousness some of the challenges that are being created by the overutilization and or unnecessary utilization of antibiotics. So I've got a lot of info that I'm gonna mow through today as quickly as I possibly can, and try to be efficient with the call today. As always, before I start, are there any questions I can answer before I get into this topic? And then, of course, I'll take any questions once I'm done as well as it relates to the program also. So anybody at all have a quick question they'd like answered? Okay. All right. Well, we're in a sort of era right now which they're calling a post-antibiotic era, where we're starting to see bacterial infections that were at one time, very easily handled or taken care of by the antibiotic drugs. But what's happened is that many of these microbes are now becoming resistant and really life-threatening to people, yet we're still seeing physicians prescribe way too many antibiotics. And this information is not out of thin air. It's coming from actually the CDC, which found that between 2010 and 2011 that 262 million people received prescriptions for antibiotics from their physicians, and of those, about 30% were unnecessary. That equates to about 78.6 million people who took antibiotics unnecessarily. That's a lot of people, okay? The report was published in JAMA, which is the Journal of the American Medical Association, a report was, and they took data from the National Ambulatory Medical Care Survey and the National Hospital Ambulatory Medical Care Survey to estimate the current rate of U.S. antibiotic prescriptions. And basically what they found is that there were an estimated 506 antibiotic prescriptions per 1,000 people annually, but only about 353 of those were appropriately prescribed. Okay, so basically what these researchers said was collectively across all conditions, an estimated 30% of outpatient oral antibiotic prescriptions may have been inappropriate. Okay, and once again, that equates to a large number of people. We'll get into the health issues that are created by this overutilization or this unnecessary prescription writing of these drugs. So once again, 78.6 million people between 2010 and 11 took antibiotics unnecessarily. That's a lot of people. So what's happened is the government has obviously, tried to, as always, get involved when they start to see this, and that's simply because on some level we need to start thinking about how do we slow down this antibiotic-resistant bacteria that is growing right now at a very fast rate. And what the White House National Action Plan did is they set a goal to reduce at least half of inappropriate antibiotic prescriptions by 2020. Now we're 2016. That's 4 years away. That means that by 2020 they hope that only what? So let's just round this up to 80 million unnecessary antibiotics. They hope that only 40 million people are getting antibiotics prescribed unnecessarily. I guess it's a step in the right direction, but that's still 40 million people that are taking antibiotics unnecessarily, okay? So they came up with this number of 15% based upon the need in order for this reduction of half to happen by 2020. So they found, once again, 15% reduction in antibiotic use is needed in order for that to be accomplished. And and it's a little crazy when you begin to think about, still 40 million people getting antibiotics unnecessarily. Now, the report also stated in terms of antibiotic prescriptions, primarily what they're being given to people for are acute respiratory conditions. These are the most often inappropriately prescribed antibiotic situations, and children under at 2 years and younger were the most frequent recipients of the antibiotic prescriptions, which is a really big deal. And you look at all these challenges that kids are having, which is a whole other conversation for a whole other day. But you look at all these kids that are getting these antibiotics at such an early age before they even got good developmental, good development of their microbiome, of their gut, their digestive tract, and everything that goes along with it. And we'll talk about the importance of the gut here, pretty soon, and why, when you start to see the deleterious effects of these things, so many people fall into such poor health. So, in terms of all age groups, so when they looked at all age groups, the drugs were most often prescribed for conditions like sinusitis, ear infections, and inflammation of the throat, called pharyngitis. And it's funny because they mention it here, as for why so many unnecessary antibiotics are being prescribed, they say sometimes doctors do it just to appease their patient. That's really kind of sad. When you have someone that's walking in and just to get them to leave or to make them feel better about something, you write them a script for a drug that they don't need. That just seems wrong to me. Instead, you need to understand the effects of these drugs before you put them into your body. And the big part of what we're really working diligently to do through Nutrimost is to educate people about the power of their own bodies to heal. Once their body is moved in the direction of beginning to rebalance it and reset it and then provided the appropriate nutrients and fuels in order to allow the body to get rid of old sick cells and replace them with new healthy cells. That's this state of autophagy that we talk about. And then, of course, xenophagy, where we're getting foreign chemicals removed from the body as well, So that's a very important process, and it gets slowed tremendously the more toxins that we put into the body. And so that gets sped up in the fat loss program because we are accelerating this idea of autophagy, okay? But to just give somebody a drug to get them to leave and to make them feel like they got something, really, unfortunately, is where healthcare has gone. I hate to say it, it's really sad. And I do have a lot of friends in the medical, world, and they're frustrated. Trust me, and I understand why. It's a train wreck, and it's a crash. It's like watching a crash in slow motion. Especially in my position where I've been basically standing back watching it for the last 15 years, and trying to communicate things to people. And the thing is, it's starting to happen, but we want to accelerate this, especially around antibiotics. Okay, so the other thing they noted was that they just may be misguided when the drug's risks outweigh their benefits. So in this particular study, which I thought was really powerful and interesting, is that there's no data that suggests worse outcomes in low prescribing regions of the country due to undertreatment. In other words, what that means is, in these areas of the country where you have maybe a poor group of people or people who aren't, seeking regular visits to physicians to get drugs, they're not taking these antibiotics the way that some of these other areas are. And what they noticed was there's really no negative outcomes to these people that are not taking the antibiotics in the amounts that these other people are taking them. So I think that's very, very powerful for people to understand, okay? So so from 2015, a World Health Organization survey, I wanted to bring this up. What they found from this survey is that about a third of people surveyed thought that you should stop taking antibiotics when you start to feel better as opposed to finishing the entire course. Obviously, that's not correct, okay? And why? Because stopping early is going to lead to resistant bugs, which allows stronger bacteria to survive and thrive. And what happens is as you begin to take an antibiotic and you start to feel better, if you just stop it before the course is over, there are bugs that are going to have survived that first onslaught that you didn't kill because you didn't continue with them. And so that gave them exposure to a drug which they can ultimately begin to build a resistance to. They can start to build their strength, increase their strength, and ultimately become resistant to that drug. And that's part of what's beginning to happen, okay? 64% of the people that were surveyed believe that antibiotics could be used to treat influenza and colds, which, of course, is absolutely not true because the flu and the common cold are viral-related type, sicknesses, okay? And antibiotics don't kill viruses. They're not meant for viruses. They're meant for bacteria, okay? So the other interesting thing that I got from this article was that misconceptions about who's at risk of drug-resistant infections was interesting as well. So 2/3 or 66% of the people surveyed believe that individuals are not at risk of a drug-resistant infection if they personally take their antibiotics as prescribed. That's not true. And then nearly half, which is about 44% of people surveyed, thought that antibiotic resistance is only a problem for people who take antibiotics regularly. And the unfortunate reality is that any of us at any age in any country can get an antibiotic-resistant infection, because when you think about bacteria, the resistance of the bacteria has a lot to do with the biofilm that the bacteria encases itself in. Okay, the thickness of that biofilm. MRSA, many of you have maybe heard of MRSA, is a very, very intense bacterial infection, and MRSA has a very, very thick biofilm. And we're going to talk about something that helps to break down those biofilms so that ultimately the immune system can attack them. But that's what begins to happen, is they begin to build up these thicker and thicker biofilms and become more and more resistant to attacks from antibiotics and your immune system over time. Okay, so here's some additional stats. So let's see. In the United States, about 2 million people are infected with antibiotic-resistant bacteria every year, and at least 23,000 people die as a result of that. And which is a pretty big number. I mean, it's kind of scary when it should be. This shouldn't be happening. Okay. And the unfortunate thing is they're predicting it's going to get worse. Okay. So in 2015, a report that was supported by the Britain Prime Minister, this guy's name's David Cameron, estimated that by 2015, antibiotic resistance will have killed 300 million people, with an annual global death toll reaching 10 million and the global cost for treatment reaching about 100 trillion. That's insane. Okay, by the year 2030. Antibiotic-resistant disease, if something's not done, what they say, if left to spiral out of control, is expected to have killed 100 million people. And the problem is that antibiotics' primary target, bacteria, are very smart. Okay, and that's kind of what I was saying, is that when these things get exposed, they're very intelligent in terms of how they begin to protect themselves and shield themselves and increase biofilms to protect them. Okay, so they're very adaptable, I guess is what I'm saying, especially when you don't understand this information and you don't know sort of what you need to do. Okay. So, and then one of the obviously major points here that I'm trying to get across and that they got across from this article was that the overuse and misuse of antibiotics has really sped up this process, okay? And this is what's ultimately beginning to create this issue with antibiotic-resistant, what they're calling superbugs, okay? Let's see here. Also, okay, so up to 50% of pathogens that cause surgical site infections and 25% of those that cause infections following chemotherapy are already resistant to common antibiotics. Okay, this is why I tell people you want to do everything you can to obviously avoid surgery or be in a hospital or be in any sort of environment like that, because that's where you're going to get your most exposure, is in those types of environments. And chemotherapies, are going to dumb down the immune system. They're going to really start to affect the body's ability to function as a whole, which then sets that individual up to be more prone to getting some type of infection that ultimately could be life-threatening, okay? And so if they make a note in here that if antibiotic effectiveness drops by another 10%, it could result in 40,000 more infections and 2,100 additional deaths following surgery and chemotherapy each year, okay? So those are some stats that are I think pretty eye-opening, and, this is really hopefully, how we begin to make change is that we as individuals begin to gather this data for ourselves instead of stuffing our head in the sand and not, and not thinking about these sorts of things. We can actually begin to take actions that allow us to protect ourselves and ultimately our families and our friends and, and stimulate the change that needs to happen, okay? Now, why do we want to avoid antibiotics at all possible costs? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones is what antibiotics do to your gut bacteria, okay, and how it starts to become a major problem with our digestive tracts. And the thing is that your gut is about 80% of your immune system, okay? So when you have a bad gut, when you have a very poor functioning gut, your immune system is depleted substantially. We also talk a lot about the gut-brain axis and the relationship the gut has to our mental health, our mental well-being. And many, many people have digestive issues who are taking antidepressants on a daily basis that aren't fixing the problem. The problem lies in their digestive tract, okay? Now, don't take that if you're on an antidepressant. Please don't take that as stop your drug. I mean, that's not I say it always on these calls. I say it on the radio shows I do. I say it in the office. We're not here to take people off their drugs. I tell you, my goal is to educate and empower people. That's how we start to take back control of this. So you have to begin to think from the standpoint of function versus just symptoms. Living in a symptom-chasing model has gotten us to the point where 70% of the population is now taking a pharmaceutical drug, yet we have promotions out there that say no to drugs. It's the biggest hypocritical, and it's such a hypocrisy, it drives me nuts. Say no to these drugs because we can't patent them and then sell them to you at exorbitant prices, but say yes to these drugs because they're created in a lab at very small amounts of money, and then prices are hiked super high and sold back to you to manage your symptoms. It's nuts, okay? And I'm not saying that there aren't moments where drugs obviously can be life-saving and can be very beneficial. They certainly can be. Unfortunately, we're in a state right now where the majority of the drugs are not being used beneficially. Okay, so and this is a perfect example in terms of the antibiotic situation that we're experiencing right now. So when you start taking antibiotics, it's going to affect your gut for sure. Okay. So our gut contains a very, very large amount of microbes, referred to as our microbiome, okay? And these good microbes grow in what's called an anaerobic environment. Anaerobic meaning without oxygen, okay? So they need to be in this anaerobic environment in order to survive, survive and proliferate and do the thing that they need to do, okay? Which, by the way, 99.9% of the bacteria in your body are necessary in order for you to live. It's what's called a symbiotic relationship. And many of those bacteria ultimately get blamed for disease in your body. It's called the germ theory, and I'm going to actually talk about that here real quick for when I come to the end of this, about this idea of the germ theory and my thoughts on it. But at any rate, strep is common in your urinary tract system. It's common within your cardiopulmonary system. So strep throat is an example. Strep is already there, so it starts to grow in excess when there starts to become an imbalance. Same with UTIs. When there's an imbalance, you start to see people that develop UTIs, and they develop them chronically. And what they do is they take antibiotic after antibiotic after antibiotic after antibiotic, and although it may get rid of it for a short period of time, it comes back again because the real issue is not being resolved. It's the same with children that take antibiotics for ear infections. We're seeing these children getting thrown antibiotics year after year after year after year for an acute otitis media, and which is a middle ear infection. But the literature supports that, if you don't treat them with antibiotics, it resolves on its own. If you do treat them with antibiotics the first time, you basically increase their risk almost 50% of ultimately having to get tubes put in. So it's pretty nuts that we keep doing a lot of these things, but there's information out there that shows us that we should actually be doing the opposite. Okay, so at any rate, when you take antibiotics, what happens is it turns the gut into an oxygenated environment in which pathogenic, or out of balance bacteria want to grow. Salmonella is an example, loves oxygen and needs oxygen in order to survive. So you create a situation of increasing oxygenation within the gut, and all of a sudden you've got a perfect environment. If you eat something that's got some salmonella on it, boom, that can just all of a sudden expand, and you're not feeling good, okay? Which goes back to what I was talking about a couple weeks, or actually just last week, in terms of having good acidity within the gut. Remember, you want to have a good acidic gut. HCl is so important. That's why animals that are eating roadkill on the side of the road can eat that and not have any problems, because their guts are so acidic. They kill everything that comes in. So any microbe that's growing on that roadkill, the animal eats, it comes in and boom, kills it dead. In our case, it's the same thing. We want to have good acidity in our guts. I take as a matter of fact, I just took my HCl before I got on this call. I had my lunch. And I took 2 HCl. I took Premier Digestase. I took my Hydrovitalize. And boom, so I do that after every meal. It's my habit. So back to this, one way antibiotics can potentially promote disease is by creating an oxygen-rich environment, according to a study published in Cell Host and Microbe. Okay, why? Because that oxygen-rich environment favors the growth of the pathogens, right? So we want to keep our gut as an anaerobic. In other words, we want to keep it in a non-oxygenated state. Okay. Let's see. So go to this other study here. Hold on. Making all these notes. So the study author Andreas Baumler, professor of medical immunology and microbiology at the University of California, Davis, told Medical News Today, in essence, antibiotics enabled pathogens in the gut to breathe. Okay? So I want you to hear that again. He said, in essence, antibiotics enabled pathogens in the gut to breathe. Okay? And he said, in addition, by killing off bacteria in your gut, antibiotics have a detrimental effect on your overall immune system. And that, like I said earlier, as he said, as about 80% of your immune system resides in your gastrointestinal tract, okay? Research published in MBio even found just one course of antibiotics negatively alters your microbiome for up to a year. And so this is why I always tell people, if you absolutely have to take antibiotics, it's crucial. I mean, it's vital that you only use them if absolutely necessary. And if you do have to use them, you've got to make sure that you basically reimplant, the gut with good beneficial bacteria. It's kind of like, the soil, and fertilizing and all that stuff. You want to get your gut loaded again with beneficial bacteria. And so I have people do that either with the probiotics that we have at the office. The probiotic we have at the office has won awards. Why? Because they're live source. It's not about the amount of CFUs. It's funny, if you go to stores and you look on the back of a probiotic, you're going to see products that are proud of themselves because they've got, billions and maybe trillions of colony-forming units within their product. The bad thing about that is that a lot of those bugs are dead. So when you're taking these products from a lot of these stores that claim to have half a trillion or a trillion CFUs, colony-forming units in them, you're taking in a lot of dead organisms most of the time. Our product only has about 50 million CFUs, but they're live source, and that's the key. You got to get live source in. Okay. But the other thing that I tell people to do is eat a lot of fermented food. Sauerkraut is a perfect example of a fermented food. Kefir would be like a fermented type of dairy, okay? But fermented foods. And Whole Foods has a great product. I talked with a client yesterday and sent her a photo of one that my family, we eat all the time. They have this brand, and darn it, slips my mind. I always forget the name of it, but they have great tasting sauerkraut. They have fermented beets, like a beet kraut, Brussels, what they call Brussels kraut, which is a combination of the sauerkraut with Brussels sprouts. It's really, really tasty. But those types of things are going to, kombucha is another good one, by the way. I drink a lot of kombucha, which is basically fermented mushroom. And then, believe me, they're pretty tasty drinks. I drink this brand called GTs, okay? But fermented foods are so great for reseeding the digestive tract, okay? So if you absolutely have to take them, you got to make sure that you start replanting your body with these good bacteria as quickly as you possibly can, with prebiotics and probiotics. The prebiotics are ultimately what the good bacteria are going to feed on. It's going to help them to thrive and survive, okay? This is some other interesting stuff that I wanted to, and I'll tell you, there's a reason why we tell people to drink filtered water, okay, and not tap water. I'm going to talk about fluoride next week, but I won't get to that now. But that's one reason why I tell people to drink to get good filtered water. But the other reason is because of this, is that antibiotics and other pharmaceuticals are actually showing up in our sewage. They're showing up in our drinking water. Okay, so this is let's see here. This is a study from in studies of sewage sludge from municipal wastewater treatment plants, which allow researchers to get an idea of chemical exposures on a citywide basis. Antibiotics and other pharmaceuticals are often apparent. And this was noted from the Environmental Health Perspectives, journal Environmental Health Perspectives. What it said was it was becoming clear that contaminants of emerging concern, those chemicals that are being detected for the first time or in increasing amounts, tend to elude treatment and remain in treated water and sewage sludge, returning to the environment, in some cases accumulating in living organisms, including humans. So what's happening is that if you're drinking tap water, unfiltered water, there's a high probability that you're getting some sort of pharmaceutical in you as well, in addition to fluoride, which you don't want. A lot of cities are supplementing with fluoride. They're putting chlorine in their water, which you don't want also. You want a good filtered water that's going to take out these drugs, these pharmaceutical drugs that are in water, and these halogens that are showing up in water as well. Why? Because they're not beneficial to your body's health and well-being. And they ultimately can begin to contribute to its imbalance and ultimately its dysfunction, which then leads to the symptoms that people develop, and then those symptoms ultimately lead to them taking a drug to try to manage the symptoms. And then because they're just taking a drug to manage the symptoms, the problem progresses over time. The drug loses its effectiveness, so they go to another drug. Now they need a second one, then a third, a fourth, and fifth, and this is how a person slowly just deteriorates in terms of their health. Okay? So additional risks that antibiotics carry. This is a big one, sudden cardiac death, which is a little bit scary. People wouldn't think about dying from sudden cardiac, failure, heart failure, from taking an antibiotic, okay? But what they found was macrolide antibiotics, azithromycin, or also known as Zithromax, clarithromycin, Biaxin, quinlanone, and erythromycin, for instance, increase your risk of sudden cardiac death. There was a meta-analysis done of about 21 million people. The drugs were linked to a small but significant increase in heart risk. What they found was that for every 1 million treatment course of the use of macrolide antibiotics resulted in an additional 36 sudden cardiac deaths. Now, that may not seem like a lot, 30 million, it's significant, 36 deaths from 1 million treatment courses. Now, if you remember, 1 million of those, 30% are unnecessary. So that's going to put us at 300,000 of those people that took that antibiotic probably got it unnecessarily. Of those 300,000 were 36 of them given those? I don't know. I mean, these are just questions I start to ask myself, okay? Which then goes back to the point why it's so important to give your body things that it needs to become healthy and to be well, okay? They said macrolides are widely used in the treatment of bronchitis, pneumonia, ear infections, and sexually transmitted diseases. Research in the past has highlighted their risk of side effects. This is interesting. Azithromycin increases your chances of dying from a cardiovascular event by 250% within the first 5 days of usage compared to taking amoxicillin. That is crazy, okay? Once again, azithromycin increases our chances of dying from a cardiovascular event by 250% within the first 5 days of using it compared to taking amoxicillin. Scary, all right? All right, what is one of the biggest issues or the biggest offenders? It's actually industrial agriculture. Now, we talk a lot through our program about getting people to eat grass-fed, antibiotic-free, free-range, clean meats, right? eating wild-caught fish when possible. Some of these farms are what they're doing. These farms that are doing farm-raised fish, they're working to try and get it to a point where it's not, what it used to be, where basically fish were being fed, themselves. They were coloring fish. I mean, so it was just kind of crazy stuff that they were doing. They're working to improve the farm raising of fish, but I tell people, you want to try to get wild caught whenever possible in terms of the fish. But in terms of your meats, definitely want to avoid these beef and buffalo and things like that are raised in these concentrated animal feeding operations. They're called CAFOs. Because why? Well, 80% of antibiotics used in the United States are used by industrial agriculture for the purposes of growth promotion and trying to prevent disease, okay? And that's happening within these CAFOs, these concentrated animal feeding operations. So in 2011, the Infectious Diseases Society of America, they put out a paper and recommended significant reductions in the use of antibiotics for growth promotion in agriculture. And why, in 2015, the Federal Presidential Advisory Council on Combating Antibiotic-Resistant Bacteria was developed. And they ultimately, the reason that is to create a national strategy to combat, these antibiotic-resistant bacteria, okay? And what they said is that the judicious use of antibiotics in healthcare and agricultural settings is essential to slow the emergence of resistance and extend the useful lifetime of effective antibiotics. Well, there's no doubt about that. We already talked earlier about what's going to happen by 2030 and 2050 if we don't do something, okay? So right now, as it stands, these concentrated animal feeding operations, these CAFOs, are the hotbed for breeding antibiotic-resistant bacteria, because what happens is they're providing these animals with the continuous feeding of low doses of antibiotics, okay, which is ultimately allowing these pathogens to survive and adapt and eventually become resistant, okay? That's a big problem. And so you don't want to be eating these meats that are being fed these constant antibiotics that are getting all of these hormones and getting all these things that are really, unnecessary, other than the fact that it creates more yield for the beef person to have a bigger animal. So you want to get animals that are out free range, eating grass. You may have animals that are grass-fed and then grain-finished, and a lot of times when they're grain-finished, so if you go to a place and you ask for grass-fed meat, and they say, well, they're grass-fed and they're grain-finished, the question you have is, do you know were the grains that they were fed non-GMO grains? You want to ask that question. But typically what happens is they leave the cattle out in the pasture, and then they will bring the grains to the cattle. So the cattle aren't put in a concentrated animal feeding operation like this when they're grain finished. They're just getting grain for the last 8 weeks to 12 weeks to fatten them up a little bit, okay? So that's where they'll bring the grains in to finish them off. But I always ask the question, I want to know were the grains non-GMO, okay? So that's a question that you could ask. So how do we avoid becoming another victim to all of this? Well, you want to amp your immune system, number one. That's really, probably the most important thing you can do. How do you do that? Well, it ultimately comes down to lifestyle choices. And that's why, once again, those of you that are doing Nutrimost, those of you that have done it have realized how much it really starts to educate you, empower you about your lifestyle choices. And I'm not just talking about food and drink, but we're also talking about personal care products that we use. Getting good positive mental nutrition in every day is another biggie that we talk about. But lifestyle is such a big deal, okay? And these choices that you're going to make, are your responsibility at the end of the day, and they're really going to help to determine the true strength and or health of your immune system or immune function, okay? Which ultimately then is going to put you in a position that's going to strongly elevate your ability to resist sickness and disease and infections and all that sort of stuff. When you have a really, really high-functioning immune system, which means you've got a really, really, really high-functioning digestive tract, everything really just kind of begins to fall in place, okay? So the stronger that your immune system is, the less chance that you're going to have of some, evil microbe or, antibiotic resistant type, bug getting in and creating problems, okay? And so how do we begin to amp up what are some things that we can do to amp up our immune system and begin to protect ourselves from these scenarios? Well, of course, the food you eat is so important, right? And I say it and said it numerous times, we want to avoid dead food. We want to stay away from dietary crack, So avoid foods that are going to tax your immune system. Stay away from the foods that have the partially hydrogenated fats, the refined oils, fried foods, heavily processed foods. Stay away from sugars. Stay away from grains, GMO grains specifically you want to stay away from. But certain grains in general are going to create some problems. Reduce your bad carbohydrate intake, right? Things that have fructose in them, which is just basic fruit juice, which is going to have a lot of it will have high fructose corn syrup. Gatorade has high fructose corn syrup, as a matter of fact. But staying away from these things are going to be so pro-inflammatory, okay? Eat a lot of good high-quality fats. We talk about that. Good high-quality fats. A lot of coconut oil, a lot of avocado, a lot of wild-caught salmon, almonds, nuts if they're not a trigger for you. So we want to, we'll say that, half your calorie intake, sometimes more, it needs to come from good fats, those good fats. And so I tell people 2 to 4 tablespoons of coconut oil a day is fantastic, okay? You want to eat fresh whole foods. You want to eat organic vegetables, organic fruits. You want to eat, like we talked about, free-range chicken that doesn't have antibiotics in it and hasn't been drugged to the hilt. You want to stay away from cattle that's been put in these feedlots and forced on one another and then, pumped full of antibiotics and drugs and growth hormones and all that stuff for its lifetime. You want to stay away from that stuff. You want to, eat grass-fed butter is another good one. So grass-fed butter is a good fat. We talked about fermented foods. Eating a lot of good fermented foods is a great idea. Okay. Eggs. There's a lot of good health benefits to eggs and egg yolks, but you want those eggs, once again, to come from free-range chickens. Okay. Avocados are one, So most of you are already doing that are on the program. If you're not on the program yet and you're just trying to get information and see, you're going to be eating good food. You're going to eat real food, and you're ultimately going to adopt that food as what you do for the remainder of your life. That's the key, okay? As you start to rebalance and reset your body, it's really pretty cool how the body starts to heal and get well, okay? Let's see here. Where was I? Okay, so fats we got there. So obviously, movement and exercise is going to be good. That's going to do a lot, not only for your health and life, but for your mental well-being and everything else. The net 4 exercises are fantastic. That's why we have them in the manual. Weight training's good. I'm a cyclist and a mountain biker. I love that stuff. Obviously, when you're in phase 2, 3 of the program, we want you to not exercise super intensively because of what it can do to cortisol levels in the body. But we're talking about lifetime, right? You're only doing that for a short period of time. We want you to get rest. 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep is so important to the body's health and well-being and resetting. So you want to get good sleep. There's a lot of research out there that's showing sleep deprivation has the same effect on your immune system as physical stress or disease does. So that's why you want to get good rest and you want to get good sleep. And the answer is unfortunately not in taking a drug to try and not put you to sleep. As a matter of fact, the sleep drugs that most people take, they don't put them into a good REM sleep. And the other thing is that some of those sleep drugs are actually causing people to sleep eat. In other words, they're getting up they're getting up in the middle of the night and they're going into the kitchen and they are eating voraciously and they don't even know it. which has also been kind of interesting to see happen. Stress, reducing stress, obviously I'm a big proponent of meditation, prayer, those sorts of things. You can actually just go on YouTube and you can type in meditation, and you'll get all kinds of things that'll come up for you. And you can do meditations at night when you're laying in bed. I do it every night before I go to bed. I lay down and I do meditations. I actually go to sleep listening to them. But I'm big about working to calm the mind. I'm big about waking up in the morning and reading something that I think is mentally stimulating to me from what I call positive mental nutrition. I want to get a lot of good PM in. Good vitamin D levels is also important. But what you want to do is the best way to get your vitamin D levels up is actually going to be through sun exposure. And there actually is there's times of the day where the sun is going to be at the perfect angle for us to be outside. And so in the state of Colorado, it's going to be at a certain time of the day versus Boston as an example or something like that. So there's something called the azimuth angle. If you want to look that up, just Google. It's AZIMUTH, but just do a little research on the azimuth angle. Azimuth is a way for us to identify and I believe there's even an app for it, believe it or not, but it's a good time for us to figure out when should we be outside exposing ourselves to the UVs, because those UVs are ultimately going to create vitamin D production within the body. Now, obviously, you can take vitamin D supplementation, and we have a great source of vitamin D, but I always tell people exposing yourself to the sun or even a safe, type tanning bed is going to be the best way to start getting those vitamin D levels up. Ultimately, we want to be, somewhere in around 50 to 75 probably in terms of our number for vitamin D if you're doing blood work. When you hit about that 65 to 70 mark, we're finding that therapeutically there's not any more benefit to it being higher. And you also have to remember that vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, so you can take too much vitamin D. So if you're supplementing with vitamin D, you definitely want to get your blood levels checked periodically to make sure that you're not taking too much, okay? Another thing is garlic, but we have a product called Allicin, which is allicin, actually. And garlic is Allicin specifically. This product it's not an antibiotic. It's been thought of as being an antibiotic, but it's actually a biofilm buster. So that's what I was talking about earlier in the call is that what you want to do is break down biofilms. You want to break these biofilms of these bacteria so that the immune system can then attack them, okay? So the Allicin is great at the office. The Nucleoimmune, those are two products that I tell everybody, just put them in your wellness cabinet. If you feel a little something coming on, you can actually pull that Nucleoimmune out, take one capsule every waking hour for 24 to 48 hours, and it's crazy how it just kind of knocks it out. They're nucleotides, so it begins to replenish the bodies because the bodies gets depleted very, very quickly as we start to fight something. And then, of course, Allicin can be just taken to help amp the effect of breaking down the biofilm if it potentially looks like it's a biofilm issue, okay? Olive leaf is good, olive leaf extract, colloidal silver, but you want to be careful in terms of how you take colloidal silver, definitely. Tea tree oil is good, things like that. So there are certainly a lot of really, really good natural things that we can do to amp our immune systems, and that's really the key. It's not waiting until you're sick to take an antibiotic. Instead, it should be, what do I put in my body today to make it work better than it did yesterday? That's kind of how I think about things. And then I'm not perfect, okay? None of us are. So it's not about that. It's about knowing what to do, when we eat something that we know that might not have been a good idea, or we go out and we have a drink with friends, and maybe we end up having 2 or 3 or 4 more drinks than we should have, and we wake up the next day and don't feel very good. That's happened to all of us. And so the key here is to know what you do in those cases, and then what happens is you begin to minimize those types of exposures because you realize that feeling good is the best way to live. Being healthy, being vibrant, being alive, that's how life should be lived. And so many people are walking around now, basically, sleepwalking. They don't feel well. They've got brain fog. They have no energy. They don't have clarity of thought. They don't have any motivation. it's not much fun. And I get it. I mean, I understand. Being healthy should be the goal for all of us, and that's why I love Nutrimost so much. Because at the end of the day, it really is about restoring health within the person, and as that health is restored, it's amazing how good we begin to feel and the weight starts to melt off. That's the cool thing. And you know what? Sometimes it's a little bit more of a process than we like, but I want you all to think about the fact that, we don't lose our health overnight. Typically, by the time you have come to start doing the Nutrimost program, it may have been decades that you've been dealing with something, or it may have been years that you've been dealing with a health issue or a weight challenge. Relatively speaking, things begin to turn around really quick, but don't forget that, the process of sickness and disease, exactly that. It's a process that usually happens over decades. The restoration of health is also a process, but it's possible. So don't lose faith in your body's ability to heal. Don't lose faith in your body's ability to be well when you start giving it what it needs, okay? Last thing I'm going to talk about here is this idea of the germ theory. I just want you to think about this. This is just food for thought. The germ theory is all about bacteria cause disease, viruses cause disease, all that sort of stuff. Well, I guess I thought about it this way. I'm thinking to myself, if I were to do a little study where I put a garbage can in my backyard and a garbage can in my front yard, both were brand new that I bought from Home Depot, and the one in the backyard I just started loading up with all of my leftovers from all the meals that we had throughout the day and garbage and this, that, and the other thing, and I did that for a couple of weeks, and I left the other one out front clean. Well, after I did that for a couple of weeks, which one do you think would attract flies? Well, the answer is obvious. The one in the backyard that's loaded with leftovers and garbage would have flies all over it. The one in front would have none, okay? Why? Because the one in front is clean. There's nothing there for the flies. Now, this is what I call my fly theory of garbage. In other words, did the flies cause the garbage? No, they didn't cause the garbage. Flies are opportunistic. They find these areas of garbage or of decay, and they go and they eat them and they break them down. It's part of the process. So more and more flies begin to show up to start breaking this stuff down and consuming it. So I have a couple of options here. I don't like the flies being all over the mess that I've created in my backyard, so I go to the local hardware store and I buy a really strong insecticide, and I go back home and I spray those flies with that insecticide, and I kill a lot of flies. Like a lot of flies, and I walk away and I come back the next day, and I'll be darned if there's not more flies back there again. So I pull out my insecticide and I spray them again, and I kill a lot of flies. And I come back a few days later, and gosh darn it, there's more flies. So you know what? I'm going to go get a stronger insecticide. So I get a stronger insecticide, and I spray those flies again, and I kill a lot of flies, but not all of them. All of a sudden, some of them aren't dying. Why? Because now we're starting to expose flies to these insecticides, which ultimately allows them to become resistant to them. Okay, this is, you know where I'm going with this. Okay, this is what I just talked about in terms of antibiotics. And this is what I want you to think, because this is a really simple analogy here. What would be the easier thing to do? To keep trying to kill the flies with more insecticides, or would it be just to get the garbage out of the garbage can, throw it away where it needs to go, clean up the garbage can, and then all of a sudden the flies are gone? You with me? They're not attracted to an area where there's not garbage for them to consume. So when you think about it from the standpoint of a person that has poor health or less than optimal health, you're going to start to see the decay and the breakdown of tissue, of cells within the body. Now, this breakdown and decay of this tissue and cells is going to perpetuate the growth of these quote-unquote, most of them friendly bacteria within your body. They're going to start to grow in excess to consume these cells that are dying, these sick cells in your body that are dying. And because your immune system is already in a decline, and then you start to develop symptoms because of the overgrowth of the bacteria that are opportunistic, just like the flies were. They're growing out of control because there's more food for them there to eat. You know, what came first? Was it the chicken or the egg, right? I mean, did the bacteria cause the issue, or was the issue there and the bacteria are opportunistic, so they began to grow in out of control? Now, this is why I think we fail with the continual utilization of antibiotics, is because we're not actually cleaning up the garbage. If we start to do something to begin to help the body to heal and to get out of this bad state that it's in, then all of a sudden the bacteria begin to go, they shrink back down to their normal size, or if they're pathogenic, we create the environment where the pathogenic microbe can't survive, right? So we do things to promote the health and the well-being of the body and restore balance. That is the key. So this idea that flies cause garbage is obviously ridiculous, right? I mean, you're all going, he's crazy, but that's what the germ theory is. The germ theory states that these microbes cause disease. I don't know. I mean, my feeling is that I could be sitting in a room with 4 people, and we're all sitting around together for numerous days, and all of a sudden 2 of them get the flu, and I don't, and neither does the other person. Well, if the germ theory was true, then I should have gotten that disease, just like them. But I got to believe that my immune system was jacked, and amped up, so whatever came in, my immune system was able to handle and take care of. Okay, so just think about it from that perspective. And the last thing is, just to kind of drive my point home about these bacteria, is that if I were to fall dead on the floor right now, and you encased me in glass, so that no bugs or flies or anything gets to me, my body would decay. And my body would start to decay because those bacteria that live within me already would start to gobble up the tissue that doesn't have any life anymore. In other words, there's diseased tissue, right? And so those quote-unquote good bacteria would start to grow in excess and gobble up and degrade or decay my body. So the point is that support your body. For those of you that are doing Nutrimost, congratulations. It's the best thing that you could ever do for your life and your health and ultimately your weight. But I hope you're all realizing that it puts you in control. It gives you your life back. It gives you your health back. And it's such a great place to be living from. So, start thinking about what it is that you're putting into your body. If you're told to take an antibiotic, really think about it and ask the question, do I really need this, or is there something else that I can do to try and avoid having to take this? If you have to take it, then obviously we talked about things to replant or reseed your digestive tract so that you can get that good microbiome built back up. But usually there's a lot of things that can be done so you can avoid having to take these drugs. So anyway, I'm not here to tell you to not take them. I'm going to remind you of that. That's not my job. My job is to help you get healthy so that you don't need drugs. And I hope that is what you all are achieving, and I hope that you're achieving exactly what you desire. At the end of the day, it's your choice, it's your body, it's your life, it's your health. When we start to take accountability for our own life and our own health, it's pretty cool what starts to happen. A lot of good things start to happen, and it's very exciting. So, hey, I'll stop there. Are there any quick questions that I can answer? All right, I'm going to let you all go. Have a great day.